session to be held approximately 2 hours. And the purpose of the meeting is a work session on policy review and fiscal operations update. The board will also be discussing the superintendent performance evaluation goals and the scope of the forensic audit. All right, and we will begin with our fiscal operations update. Mr. Rarick, please.
How you doing? Good. Yeah. I like this. Somewhat more intimidating. Okay, so I have updates for you on the revised 1819 budget process. Some communication on that. I have an update for you on 17 and close. Let's start first with revised 1819. So, just to close the loop on this, we went over this a bit during our work session, and there was a subsequent correspondence, I think, from the chair. So, we originally advertised to do budget work sessions last Wednesday and tonight, okay, for adoption on the 24th. We intend to now revise that, and we've learned that we will also have to re-advertise such that we've had a work session, that's in the books. We're not having one tonight. We will have one on the 24th, okay. And then we will advertise to the community, and I think this was your question, Member Strauss, that the hearing and the adoption will be slated for November 14th, which is the November board meeting. And so when we meet on next Wednesday, you will have a draft F200, I think it's called, the revised budget document. And so any questions about that? Just trying to respond to the question I know that was sent to, I think, Dr. Harmon. Okay.
Just clarification. So this meeting, November 14th,
yes.
We're going to do what we did before.
Yeah.
The presentation, open up the public hearing.
That's right.
Close the public hearing, do the resolution.
That's right. That's right. And really, the budget that you'll get will basically have 3 changes to it. It'll be the compensation changes, the enrollment changes, and there'll be some changes in the carry forwards of some of the sundry accounts. Okay? Okay. So,
sorry,
yes.
We also put the debt service fund, is that also changing?
Oh, yeah. Okay. 4 changes. 3 to the general fund.
3 to the general fund.
Very good. Very good. My goodness. That's correct. And we know what that should be now. So I would like to share with you some information about fiscal year 2018 close. It's not really action-oriented, but kind of in the spirit of ongoing transparency and oversharing here. I want you to know where we're at, even though I don't have a final number for you, okay? We have to send our end-of-year financials to the Educational Service District by October 25th or file an extension, okay? We don't intend to file an extension at this point, but we might. That is an open question at this point. We have had a couple things go poorly for us at the end, and I want to discuss a little bit about that. One of them is September property tax. So we are a school district, not all school districts are like this, but we accrue our September property tax to the previous year, okay? We don't learn about our September property tax until October. We, like any other school district, have basically historical collections to rely upon when we do that estimate, right? We anticipated receiving $1.2 million of September property tax that would accrue to August. We received over $500,000 less than that. The reasons for that, you know, we could explore that forever. There's no one silver bullet reason why we receive less property tax on that particular month. But just suffice to say that $1.2 million was not like an aggressive estimate. That was conservative historically, and we didn't come close. So there's something else going on there, okay?
So we're thinking about, I mean, September's not a big collection month.
Correct. Correct.
So on a normal basis, we're talking property taxes in the 100 million, 200 million plus, when we talk about our accrual 1.2 versus
Right.
0.7, let's
Right,
say.
right. It's not a regular collection, so
Right.
maybe it's delinquencies, maybe it's kind of odds and ends, I think. And you know, I have a team member that's pretty knowledgeable about this. I can only give you what I've given you at this point. But kind of, I'm in the spot of not being able to tell you what the final number is, but telling you that, for example, we published the original 17-18 budget anticipating a $1.1 million positive fund balance. We will not have that. And right now, there's a legitimate chance that we can end negative. It is close. So
We're
what
talking
is?
like a very small variance,
Yes.
though. Just because we had 1.1, if we had projected $20 million budget, we're not talking like a $20 million swing thing. We're
No.
talking very, very close.
Yes.
And because we were already going to be very close to begin with, it's just.
Yes,
the
we're
nature of
dancing on a
it.
head of a pin here.
Yeah.
So part of what I wanted to talk about, even though I don't have a final number for you, is what we're doing and why it takes longer than a typical school district, and, you know, just kind of bring you along in that. And it is kind of, there are issues that have percolated in the closing of fiscal year 18 that I realize are more kind of strategic long-term considerations that I'd like to share with you, because I think that we've talked about kind of having a shared vision of the budget strategy going forward. And there have been issues that have emerged where I'm like, we shouldn't be doing that, you know, and we shouldn't have been doing that before. And I think the only way out of this is to really kind of get all the key decision makers at the table and have some shared understandings about things. I'm going to walk you through a few of those things. So in a variety of different ways, I don't see a lot of evidence that we have really prioritized and protected the general fund as a district over a period of time. That may sound obvious, but there are not obvious explanations for that. So as a general operating principle, I think that we should be committing expenditures to the most restrictive pot of money first. So you're trying to spend your categorical dollars when you can. You're trying to commit expenditures to other funds when the law allows you to do that. And then within the general fund, you're trying to protect basic ed dollars as your most. It seems to me that we have a legacy of doing, in many cases, the opposite. Not just this year, but historically. And so a lot of what we've spent the time here in the last, I would say, month, and we continue the work, is to make sure that every last dollar that we can commit to a restrictive account, whether it's a federal title revenue stream, or whether it's a state categorical, whether it's the capital projects fund or the tech levy or whatever, that we're doing that. But the reason that I want you to know this is that, to me, this is not a one-time change. This should be, as far as I'm concerned, a change in practice for the district. And I think that's important to talk about, because as I've spent some time talking to my colleagues in some of our peer districts, they routinely do things that we've never done. There are districts in this state who don't pay for a single technology license out of the general fund. The state law is very clear that you can pay for technology license out of the capital projects fund. We've never done that. So when you think about comparing us to our neighbors, and the magnitude of just that change, that's a very significant change, particularly in how we invest in technology. We have instances where, the general fund is, well, we were in a deficit last year. We're dancing on ahead of a pin this year. And yet we have pretty healthy balances in our title budgets, in some cases all-time highs. Which is very counterintuitive to me, in terms of, again, you want to commit your expenditures to your most restrictive dollars first. I think any seasoned CFO would probably, that's what they've told me, and I'm not seeing evidence of that. And so I think that's something that we need to commit to going forward. There's only so many changes we can make within a year. Mm-hmm. But going forward, when we're running a deficit in the general fund and we're seeing all-time highs in some of these title programs, that's not a good optic, And so when we have situations where we have hiring freezes or we're doing things that we feel like we need to do to preserve the general fund, sometimes that means we're going to have to look at a specific program and say, yeah, but we need to make sure that we're spending your dollars, you know. So if it's Title III professional development and we're not allowing anyone else to do anything else, it may make a lot of sense in that case for that program to just not continue to pile up carry forward, you know. For reasons that I still have not been able to figure out, there are at least one instance of transferring money out of the general fund to the capital projects fund for capital projects when we don't have that money to be doing. And so I guess two takeaways here, I guess, is to say, I don't have a number for you tonight, but you need to prepare yourself for the fact that it's going to be very, very close, and it could possibly be small negative. That's one. And two, the changes that I'm trying to enact this year are not one time. We need to really kind of buy in. There's a lot of people making a lot of decisions about a lot of budgets in this district, and we need to kind of have a coordinated approach. And that, you know, you've asked for, you know, we're trying to forge this board relationship stuff. You know, what types of, this is something we should track mutually, because it's the key to, as far as I'm concerned, it's the key to whether we're going to be effectively operated in the general fund in the future or not. So I should have a real number for you, negative though it may be, within a week. If I don't, that means that there's maybe still a glimmer of hope and we're still working on some things. And if we file an extension, I'll communicate that. But that's the present status. But it's a present status with kind of longer term implications. It needs to be kind of a real preservation and protection of our most flexible dollars, and kind of looking back and seeing how things have been. It's not, some of these things are not surprising to me now that we are where we're at. And so want to share that with you. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So on property taxes,
Yes.
so going forward, are you thinking maybe this, the monies from September, right, are we going to try and do that in the next year rather than count on those at the
That's a good
end of the
question.
year?
So I might have to phone a friend here. Lisa is deeply knowledgeable about this, but my understanding of it is that as a district, you choose what schedule you're going to do in terms of how you accrue your taxes. And we made a shift last year to accrue September. And once you make that shift, it's hard to go back, because then you go from you get a one-time accrual of 13 months, and then every subsequent year is 12 months. There's really no reason to go back. It would be kind of there would definitely be a one-year penalty for that. And I think, as Director Hardy said, when you're so close and you're relying on something as kind of inherently unpredictable as September property tax collection, you know, most districts don't have to rely on that little sliver of, you know, because it's going to be 500,000. It might be 2 million one year. You know, the next year it's going to be $1 million, and you do the best you can to conservatively estimate that. But, you know, a couple things didn't turn our way, and so it is what it is.
Speak, Lisa.
Yeah, can you bail me out on the property tax?
Because I was here, Ben wasn't here last year when we chose to do this, so if you recall, we chose to begin accruing September property tax last year to try to offset our financial situation at that time. And that just means that we will now continue to do that, but so there really is, once we got that first year out of the way, there really is no change, because we're exchanging the future September for the historical September. So September to September is that we're just trading. Now, to speak to why our projection was higher than what we actually collected, you know, typically property taxes, you know, as long as I've, you know, been projecting them in various positions, they're pretty, I don't want to say easy to predict, but, you know, historical collection patterns are pretty, it's a pretty good basis for your projections. I saw a couple months, if you recall, when I reported out our budget status, that there were a few months that just missed that target mark, you know. couple months came in higher, a couple months came in lower, you know, and it's like, we just head scratcher. Part of that is because, you know, a component of your collections each month is based on delinquent payments. So that could be part of it. Also, I think it's tied to the housing market, as you know, houses are sold. We all know what closing looks like, so property taxes get paid. So I think that might be a component. I think there's just a lot of things going on economically. So, you know, but we know that going forward, so we'll just be even more conservative with our projections on things that we just can't, you know, tie down.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess your comments about how we work together with the board.
Yeah.
I still go back to some of the discussions we had during budget sessions about looking at program-based budgeting and the kinds of things that would ensure that we are using the funds where appropriate. So we're not pooling all the funds, and that was a historical practice. We put all the money in one bucket and try to spend. So how feasible is that? You know, are we even moving towards that direction of looking at what programs and other things are costing us?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
You've done this one a couple
Yeah,
times, yeah.
Because, you know, we've always budgeted by program because we have to. So just to clarify, you know, we don't just have one bucket of money, one pool of money to pull from. It's very, very specifically budgeted by program. So that we, you know, we have a list of about 50 different programs that we budget to very specifically. So we title, lab, special ed programs, state special ed, federal special ed. Each is very identifiable. But I think then what Ben is looking into the future for is looking at how we spend those dollars and being more deliberate in sort of making sure that anything that we can pick up a cost for that historically we've charged to basic ed, we are now, you know, very appropriately charging to our federal, especially the federal programs, but any program funding source that, you know, we want to tap into that first.
So if you were to do those program-based budgeting, would you have not cut that, you know, that money would have gone?
You know, so that, if I may, because what I've learned here since, whatever, January, if you don't start the year with a plan for these categorical programs, it is hard, it's not impossible, and you can do some of it, but it's hard to get that down midstream. You submit a budget to the, you know, there's a whole apparatus that occurs on the front end. And if you get in the middle of the year and you're trying to make change, you can make changes, but it becomes very difficult to do that. And so it really has to start from the beginning of the year with the budget that you adopt. You know, you can't come in December and all of a sudden to start, you know, there's protections against doing that at the state level. And so part of why I brought that up is that that's something we should, you know, when you're looking at indicators, you know, we were talking about our conversation about what are we supposed to be as a community, what should we really be looking at? One of the things we should be looking at is if we're at all-time highs in some of our categorical or title or grants, that doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong, but it's an indicator that something might be, and we need to take a look at that. That's a good indicator. It's an indicator for me now, because once you get in the middle of the year, it's hard to change.
And I think the representation that we've kind of seen, we look at our budget, we mainly look at variance by object. So you're talking high level salaries or certificate classified benefits, things like that. And we look at revenue by source, we look at enrollment. That's kind of the three key things we look at the top level. So I think it's where we need to get down to that next level. We can also push out to that task force is it's not just, you know, object's the right word. It's not that object level that we need to look at. We need to maximize our title, our categorical spending, a little bit of our program, and make sure that when we're looking at whatever we're looking at, that we look at it in that manner in terms of general versus categorical, or however that.
That's right. that's right. From most to least restrictive, essentially, yeah, yeah.
Can I just
yeah.
add?
Of course.
I'd like to add just a little bit to that. You've heard me say before that, and what I think Ben is saying is leveraging your categorical to where it's, you're using it together, and I think that's the key. The other one is that, remember that the categorical is supplemental, and so when it's supplemental, it doesn't say that you use it separately. It is, how do you leverage it together, right? Professional development, for example. I know that Mariah, a team, oversees that piece. So what are we doing in all of Kent Schools District related to professional development?
Mhm.
And, you know, we look at our strategic plan, and so what's our focus area? Now, what can you do additionally with professional development under Title II that actually enhances and grows what you're doing? Because it is supplemental in nature. With that same caveat that Ben mentioned is, well, let's make sure that we're leveraging it all so we're not putting it all in basic. Same is true with the supplemental. Don't do something supplemental that you can do in basic, but really it's leveraging. And so I wanted to share that's true in Title I and II and LAP and others. And so just wanted to share that.
So I think it would be important then to make sure that the reporting reflects, you know, those kinds of changes and discussions. And I think that's where the board really needs more guidance, because I think we've seen through object codes, we used to have variances by object codes. We don't see that anymore in the reports, but we could start, you know, having more of those details, you know, the drill down details that'll help us know where we're overspending and, you know, maybe this is not a priority. We can do a better analysis by looking at that variance analysis.
So I think on a monthly basis, we show the budget status by object and by program, you know, but it's at the high level. But one thing I might, as an indicator as we move forward into the 18-19 year, if you remember the slide that we show, you know, month-to-date expenditures and year-to-date, and where are we on target? So throughout the year, this past year, we were pretty much on target with our spending every month, you know, 50%, 75%, whatever. But it was that federal program category that seemed to be, if any of them were underspent, it was that. So that could be an indicator of, hey, we're not spending our federal dollars, but our basic ed programs are right on target. So maybe that would be an indicator that we should look at. Should we be spending, picking up some of the basic ed expenditures with our federal dollars? So we will, we would definitely be taking a closer look at that.
So then are we going to look at technology and how we're currently doing technology?
Oh, yeah,
to see-
yeah, absolutely.
And will we see that reflected in the revised budget?
Probably not in the revised, but probably, I mean, it might not be enough time to make all those changes in the one that you're going to see next Wednesday. But if there's there's a few things, but if there's one thing that I've noticed that is a clear difference in the way that we operate as compared to kind of just chatting with some of my colleagues that work in similar districts, it's other districts pay really close attention to allowable uses in other funds other than the general fund. Like, you know, what can we charge legally, you know? What is clearly enumerated as a specific allowable use in, for example, capital projects fund. Now, people don't think of technology licenses as a capital projects fund. It is specifically enumerated in the law as such. And there are districts that that routinely charge all of their technology licenses to the capital projects fund. Indeed, we should. But for whatever reason, you know, so that's one example among many where I think it was kind of a preference, you know, like a philosophy, that that philosophy has merits. There are good reasons. I'm not saying that, you know, but for a district in our situation, with our profile, with our financial profile, I just don't think it's the right move for us, whether it's the close of 18 or going forward. It doesn't really matter. And so, you know, that's one of a series of examples. I also wouldn't recommend transferring any more general fund money to capital projects.
Well, I hate to say it, but it's something that Director Hanscom brought up several times, but we didn't do anything about it. But
Well,
that's
you
the
know,
way it goes.
So wanted to overshare, you know, there's no action required, but these are some of the, it's one of those things where it doesn't require an action, but I felt like this is a key you know, like this is kind of the kind of thing that I want to make you aware of, and that's what I have for you today, and we're thinking about action steps on all of those things already for 18, 19. Titles first on the list, categoricals first on the list, technology first on the list, so.
I would like to add that one thing that came out from the community conversations is that there was a prediction that we would be in the negative, and if we are in the negative, then everything that we would do to make sure those who are impacted are part of the decision-making process. So I just wanted to state that.
To clarify, I know this is looking confused. To clarify, we're looking
Yeah.
like, if because we went negative, we have to make different decisions based on this year's budget, we have to alter the budget in any way, that those affected by those alterations, deferring to MSOC, just as an example, whatever that is, that the parties affected, either whoever owns the budget or the implications it impacts.
Right, we'd have to have, well, it'd be a hearing just like any other budget, so, you know.
Well, internally as well.
Yeah,
So
internally.
before it even gets to us, like, I know, this is, we don't even know what we're talking about yet, but let's just say we reduced, you know, materials and supplies. That the groups that might impact have input into how it's
Oh, yeah,
reduced.
okay.
Before it gets to us, you know, and that's just a general.
Yeah, when it gets to us, it's a decision-making time, so.
I understand what you're saying.
decisions Pretty much made.
Thanks for connecting
You
the
bet.
dots. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Ben. So we will then move on to the first reading of policy 6210. Dr. Harmon?
So first I want to apologize due to our kind of scheduling shift of having a different work session last week and thinking that initially we were going with a budget session this week. We were moving policy back a week, and so these three were a priority, so they were added, but we will go back. We've made arrangements to go back to our policy schedule and give you the week advance notice. So I want to apologize for not giving you the time. That's why there were three versions up, to make it very explicit about what the original looked like, what the track changes version looked like, and what the final version would look like, to try to facilitate some of that since there wasn't as much time in between. So we'll start with 6210, and that's the purchasing and contracting. They all have that same initial title. All three of these that we'll talk about are all purchasing and contracting. And then this first one is about authorization and control. So the last time this was updated was 2005. There's not been a whole lot of update to the WASDA model policy, other than the change of the amount. And it's interesting because it's a significant change. And I can't tell if ours was a typo, because it went from 50,000 to 5. So I don't know if that is something that we missed the first go around and that the state has had other, but I don't see anything in the law that's made it drop such drastically. But that is the one shift, and so I made that differentiation because the WASDA model is 5,000 and not 50. And so then in the final version, you see the proposed, that's what it would look like. It goes from exceeds 50,000 to exceeds 5,000. And this is mostly in relation to capital outlay.
Well, it says capital outlay, so that seems like, I don't know what the WASDA definition is, but we do need a definition. I don't know if it's here, it's already defined
I have
somewhere else. Because that, I know what I think when I hear capital outlay, but I have a lot of experience that's not Washington State schools, and so it may be different. And so we don't know if it's defined here or defined somewhere else, but we need to make sure that we can reference that definition, even if it's just reference blah, blah, blah. Know what capital outlay means. Specifically meaning, what isn't a capital outlay, and therefore I wouldn't expect to see it fall under this authorization control policy.
Yeah, I've been saying that too. There's a question about software falling under capital outlay, and I looked up all these codes. I think we added a new Code of Federal Regulations to this policy, and that particular code actually defines capital expenditures, and it defines capital assets, and it defines equipment. And so one of the things that I clearly see is that intellectual property, including software, falls under capital assets, which are considered capital expenditures. So that's something that's already referenced here. I know we added it, so I'm assuming we're also accepting their definition, the federal definition, then if we're adding this particular code of regulation.
So per WASDA model policy, when we update the language of the policy, we also update the legal references. One of the checks is just to make sure that the RCWs and WACs are still current. Sometimes they're not, or they've been embedded in others. The addition was that particular one. And if it is helpful to call out the explicit definition, we can add a paragraph or a couple of sentences that give the explicit definition and then some examples of what is included in there, if that's helpful. That's not a...
Yeah, well, even talking to what we were
Right.
talking about, like, first read, I would say, okay, capital outlay means anything out of the capital, any disbursement out of the capital fund. However, we just talked about certain technology is not disbursed out of the capital fund. So then I would say, okay, it's capital plus these certain activities that may come out of the general fund or other funds. And so that's the expectation of where this would apply.
And I also only see, this is the only one where it explicitly calls out authorization and control. So we really have to pay attention to that $5,000 threshold. So can I ask, what is the district understanding of purchases and controls based on this policy? What have we been following?
So I think that's a slightly different conversation. But I think, to answer that, I think that the initial interpretation of this would have been around capital only. When we get into contracting and bids, 6220, our policy has been a little bit different than WASDA's model, because WASDA speaks specifically to bid requirements, and ours is expanded in terms of contracts and other purchases. And I think that's where our kind of general fund expenditures and how we operate fall under 6220, at least historically, that's where I would see that. And I see this speaking more to the traditional capital expenditure process.
Well, it's right.
If that makes any sense. I'm sorry if that's...
Well, no, what I would say is, like, this has to do with the actual authorization of the purchase.
Yeah.
Bidding is, the process isn't necessarily part of that. Neither is the new vendor setup or the contracting process, unless that approval of that contract is under a capital outlay.
Right, but we have historically embedded that process of purchasing for other general fund pieces
Yes.
under 6220 is what
Yeah.
So when you ask how
Yeah.
we've operated, I'm just
Right.
saying that's how we've operated, right.
Without seeing it.
That's how we've operated.
Okay.
And so that doesn't
This-
necessarily mean that that's the correct way moving forward. This seems to be a slightly different shift in what we're talking about. And that was one of the reasons why I think 6220 really is the hinging point on operations moving forward, because it lays out some pieces where it is very prescriptive, and ours is actually a little bit difficult to follow, which is why I actually like WASDA 6220, and we'll talk about that in just a second, as an option, because it kind of very clearly explains all of that for general fund purposes, as well as capital.
Okay, just for clarification, I just want to say the reason I asked that question is we can't move forward on this just by defining capital outlay, because that $5,000, that has to mean something. So, you know, if we're talking about $5,000 worth of expenses, I mean, we're going to have hundreds and thousands of expenditures that will need board approval. So I want to make sure.
Capital.
Well, but WASDA doesn't define this as capital. They're defining this as authorization and control, which means that this is what the board approves for expenditures in general. So this is not for capital projects. Capital
you're
outlay
right.
means anything that's that is a fixed asset that's
Right,
over time depreciate over a year.
yes.
So that, there could be a lot of expenses that go through with
But
the
if-
$5,000 threshold.
But I think, like, because I'm thinking about capital, right? We approve overall projects. Let's say we approve like a multi-purpose room. We're approving the overall project, not the individual expenses within the project. So we approve the change orders and whatnot. So that's, I think, what we're saying is like the minimum capital threshold is $5,000 for individual expenses or change orders. That's the right term. As opposed to buying milk or something like that. You know, that might, that
Right,
might, that-
right,
that
right.
would have a separate
And
policy.
capital
Right.
means anything fixed, right? Fixed assets, whether
Yes.
they're software or hardware, whatever it is.
Right.
So it wouldn't be milk and supplies, right?
It wouldn't be milk supplies, it wouldn't be payroll, it wouldn't
Yeah.
be any of that, any of the
Right.
benefits, stuff like that.
Right.
Uh,
So I'm not talking about the individual, those kinds of
Right.
purchases. I'm talking about large purchases. I mean, there could be quite a bit of software,
So
hardware.
I think that's kind of where my question comes in. If, you know, because we were at 50, and if we're looking at 5, what's the impact to the district and the district being able to do business? Because knowing that we have months that we might not, we may only have one board meeting or different things like that.
But we're not even there. I mean, I feel like the district's understanding is to follow the 6220 policy and not even this. So that's why I'm trying to understand, what does the district believe this 5,000 encompasses or
So
covers?
the interpretation of that would be all. And when I saw it, my concern is the increase in the number of things that would come to the board. Because it would come to the board for certain depreciating assets.
Well, I'd say
It's-
it's almost effectively virtually everything that goes in the capital budget, plus defined things that are paid for necessarily at general fund, like maybe technology or things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be
So it'll be a
virtually
lot,
everything.
yeah. So, you know, my thinking is something like around 25,000, I think would be reasonable for our size. And WASDA put this out as 5,000, and they were shocked to see that we were at 50,000. But, you know, the fact is, our district is not the size of a Fife. Or
Right, Washington State also has several
Yeah.
smaller districts.
Right, right.
Where, right,
So what
so,
would be a reasonable number, and
Do we
do
want to
we?
look at the data? Can we look at individual purchase decisions, not necessarily the decision, but the individual purchase requests by level for the past year? So we're saying we've already been approving, let's say, everything above 50,000, and then we can think back to the volume of stuff we've seen. And so how much is really between that 5 and 50,000? Again, it's capital, so I don't know if there's a lot of projects under 50,000 but above 5,000. Could be if it's technology, you know, there could be a bunch of different things that fall under there. But if I'm thinking about, I'm trying to think back to the list of all the stuff we put in the capital bond.
Yeah.
Not a lot of individual projects under $50,000.
Yeah.
But that's
Well,
fine.
I mean, the issue there is also the contract. You know, are we talking about expenditures, or are we talking about the contract amount? I think Denise brought this up a long time ago. So that's a whole other issue. You know, if we're just talking about a one-time payment of $40,000, then it's not going to fall under this. But if we're talking about a contract over time is $200,000, are we capturing that in this language? So I think that's a whole other question. And according to WASDA, this is the number that they go with for contracts. So we almost need a audit on this, I think, policy audit.
But just, I think it's just data set, right? Like, I want to see it at the purchase order level, I want to see it at the asset level. And I don't know if it's the individual request, but see like what that disparity, I think the purchase order level, in my sense, might be the appropriate level. It would cover, it wouldn't necessarily cover, you know, smaller contracts that add up. The individual purchases might be $10,000, purchase order $75,000, something like that. Last or something like that.
I can give you an example that you will likely see on next board agenda. The 5-year lease for our print shop copier is due. It is $650 a month, but over 5 years, it'll be approximately $34,000. So that's coming to you because the total amount is over, you know, right. And because there are 3 of those that are due, the total of the 3 reaches the, you know, so it's kind of getting there.
So here, you know, it says and contracts, so I guess it does cover in that sense. But I guess, you know, we need to be really clear on what this 5,000 means, you know, what are we talking about?
So
So yeah, Denise has got something.
I'm looking at the capital projects voucher that we approved at the last meeting. And there's only one item on here that's $18,000, which is,
You know,
fees for HVAC.
yeah.
So that doesn't seem like it would, so, but then the total invoice.
So laptop
Are
repair
these
is
the
like a big
places
one.
where we would find those pieces? Because there's a couple things over here that are over, there's a laptop repair that's $8,400. Well,
In theory, we should be approving the contract, right? We shouldn't be
By the
approving the
contract or by
expenditures.
the check number.
right,
This is
because
this
it's
is
2
that.
separate line items.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm.
Well, this is before and after. So this means the work's already been done and we're paying.
Right, but we would be seeing this before. If we-
Yes, we
that's
want-
what
we
I'm saying,
wanna
so
see
we
this
would
Yeah,
be
we
seeing
should
this
see the
before.
contract before,
If-
and not when the payments are going out.
Correct.
And so I think it's not clear here when that happens in this policy.
There is also no procedure for 6210,
Yeah.
WASDA model or otherwise. And that is also an opportunity where we could lay out some procedure around how they'd like that could operate.
Yeah.
And so we can look at some other districts to see if they have procedure,
Yeah.
but there's nothing in WASDA, we've not had a history of that, but that's why there's not a procedure presented, not even for information, is that there's not any. We've
Yeah.
not had one, and WASDA does not have one.
I looked at this, and, yeah, that CFR, you know, does give definitions, so I think we're okay. We just need to, as a board, kind of determine what that amount ought to be, and then have some sense of what the process should look like, because I think that's not, and that would be a result of what our purchasing process looks like, as you mentioned. So we would need to kind of see, what do our internal controls dictate, you know, some of that. How are decisions made internally, and is there separation of duties, you know, those sort of things that are in place.
So heard a request for data. Also heard a request for an addition of some language around defining capital outlay and expenditures. And so this seems like this is a second reading on the pathway to a third, possibly, is that my
Yes.
interpretation? Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
That's why we're starting
All right.
early.
No, that's fine, I just
We
want to
need
make
this
sure that I'm
discussed.
not, okay.
Yeah, the definition of capital and the definition of purchase. So,
Okay.
so what is that action where we want to approve before it happens? Contract purchase order is, you know, whatever that is.
All right. That's a big one.
And that one wasn't even the fun one. 6220 is really the one where, I can say it's wow. So this one is bids and contracts. And what you had were 3 different versions. You have our original, which is essentially about a page and a half. You have the one with markups, which essentially looks like a complete revision, and it is a little bit, because when I went back to add in WASDA's model and its language, it actually lays it out in a way that makes it really clear to the public, to a staff member who's trying to follow this to read. And it's not, our original policy is not really clear, because it mixes some of the differences between what's public works and use of state funds, if there's different guidelines around federal funds, if it's a repair, what are their exemptions. The exemptions are not necessarily universal, and so it makes it clear which exemptions apply to which groups, and really clearly lines out the dollar amount processes.
So these are for public works, specifically using state funds, and for procurement using federal funds. It's not other things, right? From what I see. The two sections here are procurement
Yes.
for state funds and public funds, but not other funds.
So I guess it's clear, the state funds include local levy funds, is that specifically included? If not, there would appear to be a gap, or potential for a gap.
So I would interpret levy funds as state funds, but it's not expressly stated that way. Nor was it really expressly stated that way in our prior. It wasn't called out as this is this, this is this, these are these. It also does not speak to that fourth pot of money, which might be competitive grants, or either even non-competitive grants that are not federal, or that are not tied to federal or state dollars. Are another pot of money that could also fall under the same rules and regulations.
So this is the one that you're, so the language that you put in here doesn't mirror exactly what was. So
It doesn't exactly, because we have a paragraph that speaks to some statements and belief systems,
Yeah.
and so I kept that.
Okay.
Because I didn't think that belief systems changed, or at least I wanted you to see what they were, and if they have, then we can update those. But I wanted to keep the belief systems and then added more for organization. It just made it easier to follow when it was outlined this way. And,
But some things are out, right, like contract approval.
that's procedure.
Oh,
This is
I'm
procedure.
sorry,
That's why I said this
okay,
is, we haven't even
sorry.
gotten into procedure.
Okay,
We're just
got
looking
it.
at the policy.
Got it.
We've got to determine the what before we determine the how.
Yeah.
This, and then it kind of gets into procedure, but so there's 1B, which is exemptions, which was stated for exemptions to 1A. That first line indicates that only exemptions come from the board. And I don't know if there is a requisite change in procedure where, under my current understanding, other exemptions can happen from the board, such as a sole source or a single source. Just from evidence in the past that sole source justifications don't necessarily always go to the board, this would indicate that they would at all times, for anything that falls under 1A.
And it's similar for 2 as well, I think. It goes, yeah, it goes through, yep. There's another set of exemptions which are similar. I think it starts off with one of those.
Russ, Ross, are you talking about on page 2 in B under exemptions? It
Yeah.
does say the board may
Was
waive
that the
bid
board may
requirement.
waive. And so, we've talked about this and we've looked at the accompanying procedure. There's, in general, there is a process for not, going around the formal competitive bidding process. And one of those is a single source or a sole source. But it's who can exempt that from the process. And it says here that it's the board, and necessarily not anybody else. And I just want to make sure the procedures would reflect that. That if someone seeks a sole source, seeks an exemption to the formal competitive bidding process, that it always goes before the board.
It also means that in case of an emergency, we would host an emergency board meeting.
Correct.
And not that the board wouldn't be aware either, but it's just, it lays out all of those opportunities where.
So, the part that confuses me. So the authorization is there in 6210, but if they're capital and they're using state funds or federal funds, okay, we should get to the, when we get to the procedures, we'll get
So the
there.
board may say,
That's
yes,
my
we can spend the
questions.
money. Now this is
Yeah.
saying that here's the process for which we have to advertise.
Right.
Yeah.
Who will get the contract, or who will be the vendor to actually do the work that we've asked or requested permission to do.
Right, so say 1A, talking about less than 40,000 or something, is over 5,000, based on the current policy as is, it would go to us for approval to do that purchase, but then could follow it on competitive bidding process if
Yeah.
over 540.
So authorization's always governed by 6210. We're all clear on that.
Yes.
We're no longer going to 6220. Okay. I just want to make sure.
10 would describe the process by which we reach that,
Right.
who should we buy from.
Okay, that's clear.
Now, I made no changes to procedure for 6220 because I wasn't sure which direction we were going in for the process. And so now that I have some clarity on the direction the board would like to go with the policy, I can update procedure to reflect those changes. And then for your information, it will likely look much more similar to the WASDA model because it matches the WASDA policy language. I did share it with capital and facilities with Dave and with Fred. And from the legal aspect, they took a look as well, and now we'll work on procedure. And so you'll see that for informational as an update because they are likely the ones who go through that process more than anyone else. So want to make sure that they're involved in that, but that's what you'll see. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's a lot I would like us to strike from the current one. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, just to make sure that it's aligned, but also to make sure that we're not missing anything that is aligned. But I didn't want to start those changes without knowing where you wanted to go and what
Yeah.
parts you wanted to keep in the 6220 first from a policy perspective.
Sure. So we'll come back then, right?
Yes, so these are, these are not, right, these are not done. You'll see this again.
Okay.
With some small revisions. We made a few notes of some things that you wanted changed, highlights. And then you'll see the informational, it may be a first draft, it may be a final, depending on how far we can get in a week with the procedures for 6220.
Okay, all right.
And then last, but certainly not least, of our 6200 is 6230, purchasing and contracting relations with vendors.
The only thing I wasn't really clear on this was on the policy, why we changed the wording around. I understand why we inserted that second line there, but we went from board members and district employees will not accept a gift or favor to neither board members, administrators, nor staff will solicit or accept a gift. I mean, is there a reason why that one changed, but the second part didn't change?
So the
Are we
language
just following
was almost
WASDA?
verbatim from what, right,
Oh,
was
okay.
WASDA in the second
Just-
paragraph. It's just kind of cleaned that up and just made it explicit and clear.
Okay.
Plain language, so there's no confusion about who, well, it wasn't a gift, it was a favor, it wasn't a, just,
Yeah, it just didn't have the strong verbiage, will not, you know, and I don't know why they haven't, like, why we changed it to will not.
well, one speaks to just acceptance of, the other speaks to the actual request or solicitation of as well as acceptance.
Right.
And so that's a slight addition to, and it's the fine line and difference between cultivating a relationship and the actual completion of that relationship, I guess, by accepting a gift that makes a conflict of interest. So it covers both of those pieces under
No, I
the
meant,
chain.
I meant that well, anyway, that's semantics, but we can talk later. It's that first line that it changed from will not accept to will solicit. Neither board members nor staff will solicit. It's just a statement. It's a stronger statement to say that we will not solicit or accept a gift. So I was just wondering why we changed that.
So if you prefer the previous language, I can add the word solicit. Solicit is what's missing.
Yeah, no,
And
I
so-
don't want to change any of the words there, but just the strength by which we're stating that is different. That's all I'm saying. So I don't know why we changed it.
So just a question, right, when they say a gift, I know, I've seen where they spell out that a gift is something, I mean, if somebody gives you a cookie, is that a gift and you have to throw it in the garbage? I'm just saying, right? I mean, I've seen it in
Legendary
different
donuts.
things where you spell out nothing below 25, above $25 is considered immaterial or something like that. Do we need to put some sort of language like that? Because it's not uncommon for people to bring, even a cookie or a box of candy or something. So are we saying that that would have to be thrown out? So just asking.
So I would make a suggestion that you have some clarification around that. So as a former federal employee, there are regulations around a limit of what you are allowed to accept and some definitions around what is considered a gift that is, that there's multiple categories. There's a gift that you don't have to, that you can keep. There's a gift that you can keep if you report it. And then there's a gift that you can't keep at certain different levels. And so I can present some of that language in the next version to see if that helps in clarifying that.
I think it might be nice.
No, I
Or to
think
have
so.
an
I think
amount
the
so that-
Yeah.
definition's all over the place.
Yeah.
Like mine work as a definition.
Yeah, I mean, like, lots of
It's
places have
all
a-
over the place. Right.
Well,
I
as
think
board
that
members,
specific
we
definition,
follow state.
would be, or the language would be.
Yeah, it would be at least to see, to consider as a consideration. Okay.
But if it's a district-wide policy, right, we want
Yeah,
to make sure
yeah,
that people,
definitely.
what that is.
Yeah, the board members can't take anything over $25 as a state policy, but
But I think we should spell it out so there's
Yeah.
no question.
One of the other terms that we need to clarify, because I know we're using the last one policy, what says financial interests. The next section says ownership interest. Just wanted to clarify whether those mean the same thing, whether they mean different things. Obviously, ownership has maybe a more strict definition of financial interest. Necessarily want to clarify those or give examples.
if you cut that, Dr. Harmon, fine.
I did the difference between financial ownership and the difference between financial and ownership interest and clarifying the difference.
Yeah, so what I mean, generally, I think ownership interest actually talks about ownership equity or financial interest could be broad.
Right.
It could be commission or stipend or whatever that is. It's not ownership.
So will we see all three of these then again for kind of like a second before they go to a third, since they're all so
Yes,
closely
so
on-
they will
okay,
all- yes.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
And we do need to look at the other purchasing. Those are not as critical as these three, so.
So there were a slate of 6,000 series that were
Yeah.
going, but per the request, these were the three that were the priorities. I
Yeah.
added them to this board meeting.
Yes.
And the remaining, I won't say the remaining 6,000, but there's another like 6 or 7
Yeah.
that we talked about that were next on the list. That would be in the
Okay,
next set
the
of
next
policy
one.
reading. Yep, our next
Okay,
meeting.
Great, thank you. All right.
And you will likely see, my attempt is to get these on next board meeting, so the 24th is the second reading during
Yes.
meeting.
Yes.
So,
Okay, so, thank you, Dr. Harmon. We will move on to superintendent evaluation goals. So this is, I believe, our third round of reviewing KPIs as well as the goals. Well, the goals are not changing, but except there was a language
Right, okay.
change.
We agreed on the goals
Yeah.
last time, so the language shouldn't change.
Yeah.
Once they flesh out how both KPIs, I think what we have here, which is what baseline data can get.
Yes. Those were the two questions. So let's see. So do we want to go through the first goal? We numbered, we numbered on the side each goal because it got very confusing. So it's 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Seven goals? Yeah, okay. All right, so we'll just go through each one and see if anybody has questions, clarifications. Number one, Dr. Harmon, I know you worked with Dr. Watts on some of this.
Just to get, to try to quantify some of the things that you all were interested in. And
Yes.
so, from my perspective, it would just be helpful if these are acceptable, quantifiable measures.
Okay.
Um,
Gotcha.
would be helpful feedback for me, and, or if you'd like to go in a different direction, knowing that would be helpful so we know what data to pull together. And then always having timeline is helpful to make sure that we get that back to you in
Yes,
a timely manner.
Saw the ones that were like, had baseline data available. I guess part of my question was, so when we actually do the first go-round, are we gonna see that baseline data only, or which ones of these would actually have data that we'd be able to look at on a quarterly basis? And that's what I wasn't clear about, is which ones have what.
So here in quarterly review, that is a different take on some of this. So I honestly would say you all discuss for a few minutes and I will take a look at these and I can answer that question for you. I was like, I can't answer that immediately because that's a new question.
So when I say leading or lagging indicator, well, like for the first one, lagging indicators before your graduation rate, presently an update for the first time.
Right.
But I think as many of the leading indicators that we can get, from the actually say, looking at graduation rate, first quarter. So do we have as many of the leading indicators that we have in addition to baseline? Look at those.
Right. And
But
so,
obviously, like, the survey hasn't been produced yet,
Yeah, you
you
can't do
know,
it.
there's nothing to look at,
but for graduation rate, so that's one of the summative indicators that you have here. The leading indicator for that would be students on track with credits and things. And sometimes it's not always the seniors in the moment, it's previous grade levels and where they are. And so those kinds of pieces, we will be finishing our first quarter shortly. And so report cards will be going out. And so that's data that we could have available. And so some of these are, and that's why I just need a minute to kind of take a look to see like quarterly
Yeah.
what's available
Yeah.
versus the lagging indicator designation is given to those that are typically annual or are given once. So there's not really an update of that. But the leading indicators were labeled that way and picked so that you have things to monitor throughout the year. You may not see all of these at every quarterly review because some may be semi-annual, but they were developed to have a mix of indicators, some that are throughout the year and then some that are once a year. So let me just take a look.
Thinking of today, the meeting that just came from right here. Thinking about the achievement gap, we talked through this. This was brought up, we talked about comparisons of historically underserved student groups. We have a new set of students that are English students that are historically underserved, but they are still students who are affected by some of this, and they tend to serve. So I'm wondering if we could add something to where, and I mean,
Newcomers?
yeah, to call out not necessarily just the historically underserved, but also the Part Yale students and students that are, that are affected by the gap as well. Is there a way to capture that just in that picture, what that looks like? And so the way that we did it, we talked about vulnerable populations or some language to incorporate, for example, our homeless kids, right, or our foster kids there. So just trying to encompass all of those students in this, because those are students who we also see those gaps for as well.
When you say new, do you mean new to country, new to Kent, new
Well, we have
to?
refugee students that we have, and so those aren't considered historically underserved kids.
Newcomers.
vulnerable population, right? And they already have a population, whatever that looks like. So trying to figure out how we can encompass those kids as well.
So I think we could kind of create an aggregation of vulnerable students as a descriptor. I think some may be hard to absolutely designate, because yes, if they come in as a refugee, we know that. If students are homeless and they disclose that, or the family discloses that, then we know that. There's some groups that we don't
Right.
ask
So for
about
example, our foster
something,
kids, like
right,
we track our foster kids.
right.
So that would be a group that would be here. Our homeless, for them, I mean, they don't know all of them, but there is.
Right, there are, right, so we do have codes
Right,
for,
so
and they
know
are
that they're
disclosed.
identified. So I think those students need to kind of be called.
So just taking out the historically, maybe putting
Well,
under
that's
certain,
included, like,
you want,
that's included
it's,
together. Maybe a broad, it's like a broader term.
So
I see the vulnerable as a
Yeah.
descriptor, and then that kind of expands it a little bit. And I'm making a note about homeless as examples and refugee.
And a part of the SSA guidelines and all those pieces too, so, you know, just making sure we're for all of that. When we talk about percent of high school students participating in a post-secondary experience prior to graduation, do we just want to know the number participating, or are we looking at the number successfully complete? Those are two very different. And so one thing to give students access is another to make sure they're successful in that program. Is it enough to give them access?
I think it might be. Meaning the leading indicators of participating. So it's both.
Well, some of the.
Students participating and succeeding.
Right, because of the class, or if they're, and we can look at that, you know, passing, that could fall under the temporary, however, when that class would happen, but just thinking about, is it just the students who have access, or is it the students who are successful?
could I be,
And it's just a conversation, or can it be both, or, you know, because like I said, I know those numbers are very different.
so you're advocating for both? Same.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I mean, think back to
You're
the
taking notes, okay, all right.
Put it
So
in.
we're
both
changing.
the model itself and the model actually improving learning outcomes. We want to know both participation and success.
Good catch. Done with one, moving on to two.
One question about staff. How often do you calculate that metric?
Staff retention.
Yeah, it's a lagging indicators. I don't know if you look at it quarterly or.
We tend to look at it in the fall, so we will be presenting to you next week, actually, full numbers of all the workforces you
Yeah.
asked for. So usually in the fall, so we're checking it. And that's to the nature of K-12. Our people separate normally in July. It's not like they're separating all through the year.
Actually, that brings up a question. So, this year we would then use that as our base information, right?
So our
Because
retention into 17, this one 18, 19. Our retention into 18, 19 would be those who separated. We would pull those out and say out of the group that's with us last year, who are still with us in 18, 19.
So I think we have to
We'd have
that with that. So we're basically 16, 17 going into 17, which we already know the data's fixed basically. And then we're looking at that compared to 17, 18.
It's one of the reasons why we provide you trend data on retention so that you can see it from year to year.
Okay. Any other questions to number two? The survey results. We did have a question about how often that goes out. This is the yearly.
Parent and staff are annual. That is actually the next engagement work for our strategic planning steering committee. They had some really good ideas about types of questions to ask, ideas to get behind, and so that next work will be helping to weigh in on developing, especially stakeholder, external, but staff climate survey as well.
So the question on that KPI is, it says percentage of respondents who agree or disagree on a number of things. So let's say that some of them look good and some of them don't look good. How do you get that information?
So
That makes sense.
this does not necessarily mean it's going to be one question.
Okay, so this question will not be asked.
So this is not the exact question.
Okay.
These are the ideas and concepts
Right,
that were, because actually these are the ideas and concepts that were expressed as important to the strategic planning steering
Right.
committee.
Right.
This can't be, this is actually the exact opposite example of a great survey question. It is typically,
Right.
they
That's what
typically
I'm
they call
saying.
it double
How do you
barreling,
measure
but I would say
this?
this is multi-barreling, and it's
Right.
that's exactly why you don't ask it this way, because you don't
Right.
know which piece
Right.
to take action on. So if it's bad, I don't know
Right.
what to move. I don't know what you're commenting on, and so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how do we make that a KPI? I guess is my
Well, and
question.
so it's, there may be several questions, and because the survey is not complete,
Okay.
it was more about capturing the ideas expressed from the Strategic Planning Steering Committee.
Mhm.
If they're important to the public, if they're important to the board as our priority initiatives,
Yeah.
then this is a sentiment that these are ideas that should be watched, and then the
So
actual
you'll ask
questions.
separately, and
Yes.
then you'll
And as the
come up
questions are
with the-
developed, we'll say, these are the questions that we believe align with these ideas.
Okay.
And here's the percentage of respondents that say, that talk about this piece, that talk about this piece, that talk about this piece, and this piece.
Okay. All right.
Just to that point, I think it's important, just to look at the retention, it says same position, same location, and within district. And then later there's a KPI having to do with leadership pipelines. So as people are, we want them to move into new positions, well, that would be counterproductive to same position, same location. So just as we think about those two together.
And that's why there are three different things. So there's retention in the same position, there's retention in the same location, meaning the same building, but you may have a different role. And then there's within district, because as we think about pipeline, we don't want to compete and say that, oh, well, we don't have great retention with people in the same building, in the same position. Well, it's because they may have progressed through the pipeline and now have a different position within the district. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't just focusing on one piece of that, and that actually came out of the steering committee as well, because they were thinking about, well, what does it mean if they do this? We want them to advance or have advancement opportunities, but we don't want to lock in our retention.
So should we say or instead of and?
Sure.
Mm. Thank you. All right. Number 3. Well, this one, I remember we went through some specifics on what we wanted to see, like being in a classroom. And so how do we capture specifics, like being in, Dr. Watts being in different buildings, you know, but just by saying the frequency and number. It didn't get to that particular point that I think was overwhelmingly mentioned during so many of our conversations and, you know, Dr. Watts being out into the buildings.
Yeah, but I think that that was one that is quantifiable. I mean, so if being in buildings, being in classrooms, and being out in the district in that way, in our educational buildings, that's a clear metric. It's the number of opportunities, or the number of times that it's out there, and that can be captured by calendar. It could be about, this is for you all to decide, is it quality, is it quantity, is it, I mean, what's, I guess, the goal, or what is, yeah, what's
Is
the.
there
an expectation?
Right, right.
Yeah,
So I was like,
you have baseline data, but I don't even know what that baseline data
Okay.
looked like. Because we've never seen it before, we've never looked at this before. So the other ones, we kind of have an idea of what baseline data is, we want more detailed information. this is just something to where we kind of need to work through what the baseline data is and then measure whatever it is.
I think I'm hearing two
School
things.
numbers in school, whatever it is.
I think I'm hearing one is these ones here, working through what the baseline is. But the other one is, did we want something that specifically called out that Dr. Watts will be in buildings or something along that line?
Yeah, we
As-
talked about that.
Because that one's not here.
Yeah, that, and it's sort of separating out, you know, the activities with our community organizations and buildings, you know, representing our, or being present in our buildings. So those two things were called out at our last meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, and, yeah, the number 2, we wanted some specifics there. The number and frequency. I think also the feedback loop are you all comfortable with the feedback loop? Because I think that was a long discussion also. How does the communication work where it's not a one-way, but it's actually a two-way with board directors as well as with community?
Yeah, because the percent of engagement's not really what I'm looking for when I think of feedback. Thinking about took the district or the superintendent's team took what was said, took action on it, and then can point to how that action was in the consideration for how it was made. I don't know what metric that is, but
So for them, that for us or what is that for?
I remember talking about both internally as well as externally.
And not everything that comes in may be actionable too, so.
right.
um,
So like, well, an example would be, hey, so you took feedback in, I had a communication, I had a meeting with the person who provided the feedback before the decision was made, not after the decision was made. Not a nothing, but like, when, you know, I took it in, we talked about it, we had this meeting, and then we made the decision, either in that meeting or after. So that's an example of something that I look for feedback. Even if you don't just do what everybody says, you take it in and you meet with them, explain why you're doing it, not doing whatever that is, before the action is taken, something like that.
But how is it shared?
How's it shared?
So I understand what you're saying. So part of it is that a communication plan, it needs to be in there. Yeah, that needs to be there, and how much is he adhering to what we're asking in the communication?
But should we say we?
Yeah, I think it's evidence of the actions of, following the communication.
Board or district? One.
This would be, this would.
I don't think it's a district, because we have a
Just
separate
one B.
plan.
Okay.
Yeah, because the board.
Just wanna make sure I'm clear.
Which would be very good.
And it would become the district even when we get the information and we send it to you. So the response would be coming from the district. So there's still that loop going back to the district. From the board.
Yeah, the measures are just different, so I wanted it to be.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, sure.
Exactly.
That last part was very helpful. I was just like, wait, I'm not sure.
Thank you. Anything else there? Diversity of opportunities. Okay, languages were added, thank you. We talked about that. Okay, going on to number 4, the superintendent has improving financial health. I did want to add policy under vendor contracts. not just processes followed, but policies.
I mean,
60
you wanna
to
add 60 to
10.
10.
Yeah, 60 to 10 as a policy.
Authorization for the bidding process.
Adding after the word policy 6210 and then after procedure 62.
Yeah, there's no process. That's
But
why
we
it's
are going to be-
confusing if you, but I think if you just put down policy 62, 10, 20, 30, and their associated policies, you know, I think
But isn't the plan
I mean,
to have
associated
a procedure?
procedures. And their associated procedures, so then we have that.
Well, I think this is, so the vendor contracts, I think, is more about everything, purchasing contracts and vendors. It's the whole section covered by those three policies.
What was your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just asking about the vendor contracts portion versus purchasing portion. So you're thinking they're the same, they fall under the same umbrella?
Well, I think we want to know about both.
Right, and that's what I'm saying.
They don't
So
necessarily fall under the
this
same
only speaks to
umbrella.
number 3 vendor contracts. So should we, is there?
I think we reference the policy, so like whatever the subject of the three policies are, that's what
So if we put
it's
6210
Yeah.
here, then that would be,
It's both the approval process, the bidding process, and the vendor.
so I'd say, so that should be spelled out a little differently than if we had 6210 underneath, so number 3, or number 3.
So we can just say purchasing and contracting, right? That's our
Yep, that's the,
regular language.
okay.
Okay, so variance reporting
Another
actually.
question is, we could put 6 at the top of the next page. Within a purchase order, expenditures include items over budget, I think it's in excess of budget, that's what we're talking about? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, in excess of budget.
Okay, and so doesn't have a little asterisk. So do we have a, this is more about the board, do we expect 0? Or do we expect a certain number?
From my perspective, it better be. It better be.
Because the baseline is 2%. You know, first baseline, I mean, I don't know if baseline is 10%, I don't know what the number is. So that's what I'm saying, I don't know. And so otherwise, without a baseline, okay, that's fine. Do we think we expect 0%? Or low single digits? And is this the right action? Do we have-
Historically, I can't say. Moving forward, better be zero. Better be. Probably not.
So then we do have a base.
I'm sure we do.
Yeah, so,
mean,
so even the variance reporting, I would think that would be, you'd be able to get that on a quarterly.
Oh, yes, that's not, yeah.
All of
Well,
those
I mean,
things.
I'll give you an example. Would a chief have to approve increased spending for homeless student transportation over budget?
Absolutely.
If so, then that would be a legitimate approval. Therefore, a baseline of 0, or 0% wouldn't be necessarily feasible.
Right.
So that's where if we can get a baseline, I think we can get that understanding of what we expect. Or
I would always like to encourage us, though, to, as we think about projections of our expenditures moving forward, that we get as close as possible. We won't always hit the mark, but we get as close as possible looking at our history of expenditures to include increased expenditures from year to year. So for example, some of our legal fees historically have been over what we've budgeted for, but thinking about that and building that into our next. Yep. So no, it may not always be, and there may be some legitimate ones,
Yeah.
but we want to continue to get better at that, and so it's a good one to watch
I think so. I think it's good.
to make sure we're.
Yeah.
All right. That's right. Okay, number 5. Safe and humane organizational environment.
There's nothing in here around the so I see about laying around student traumas, but that doesn't address
need to define what prepared means. It means both education about how to support students and how to.
Students are just talking about, so there are students who, because it talks about cultural responsiveness, so
Right.
that doesn't mean students in trouble. They can be legal, so. And sometimes the names are not, so they can possibly show up. That's fine. Culturally responsive, so where is the about learning to be able to create those spaces, not to necessarily support adult learning for our students, and probably adults learning.
Just what do you want to see?
I want to see the percent of staff participating in supplies, trainings, and other professional development opportunities around cultural structures, culturally responsive practices.
You brought that up.
So I do want to just share that the race equity policy, the way that it is currently written in 1801, it is working in that way, because we came together and we worked through that, and that came out of our council, out of our race equity council that's called for to advise the superintendent as one of the things that they would like to see by the end of this year is a multi-year plan. And so it is working the way that it's intended to by policy. So I think it's just taking time because it was just 17 when it was gathered, and I met a couple of times. So I just don't want it to be lost that it is a conversation that the council is having with the superintendent, and that's moving forward. So it could be added there, perhaps in number 4, but it is a conversation that's been happening with the council itself. And we had staff and community members that attended, including our professional development director of professional development. So it was called, that specifically was called out as a goal. So we're still working through what that will look like and what the work will be, but as called out in policy, those are recommendations that go directly to him to live out the policy and make sure that it is being lived out. So that did come up.
You know, I'm sorry, you finished? Okay. The one thing that we didn't discuss, I don't know if it fell anywhere, were special education. So you don't think that should be called out? I don't know. It's such a big, well, the reason I say it is it's such a big part of our budget. I mean, we have, I think part of it is staffing. I think that's the big part. I'm concerned about, part of it is retention, right? And then part of it is our dependence on these organizations that we're contracting with, and so it's a budgetary issue. So what are we doing to change that trend? It's not something we done. I know, but I almost feel like we need to call it out that something is changing. You know, how do we even get to the indicator part? Baseline data on that. I don't know. Yeah, I almost feel like we need a goal on that. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it's such a big priority and concern, and I feel like we need to dedicate our strategic plan almost to the, not be an afterthought.
So there's this portion of special education as well. Could it be called out as spots?
It's my thing, it's very, at 100% of everything that we want. At some point, we have to say, okay, do we have, and I think we should add special ed somewhere, right, in this?
Right, that's what I'm saying.
I'm just saying,
Should
if we
add it
start
somewhere.
adding, I mean, we could spend all year doing goals and KPIs and never get to the end.
Well, I think my point is, Debbie, that we need to call it out somewhere.
Okay.
And the issue is also the expense involved in that, and we have to address that. And I don't know if it should go into staffing in number 6, you know, it could go under premier workforce. It seems like that is our big concern right now, is that we are contracting out so much of this work. So there's something there that we need to see a change.
So could we maybe add something on the student groups under number 2 and 5, and then add something in 6 on under staff?
I'm sorry, where are you?
So on goal 5,
Uh-huh.
where we're talking about disproportionality, add something in there about special ed, as far as that is one of the groups that we want to look at about how we're doing on disproportionality of special ed.
Well, I think you have student groups, and I think that's fine, because it's already disaggregated by special ed. I don't think that's the issue that I'm bringing up so much, because I think that's covered under student groups. I think the issue is costs, containment, you know, staff retention in that area, how effective our contracts are, so that would sort of fall under
Number
4.
4.
I was gonna say, is it a 4?
Yeah,
Or financial
organizational
health?
effectiveness.
Is it a-
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it could, that seems like the right place.
So when you talk about the cost associated with special education programming, what specific things are you wanting to know in terms of, just so I'll know how to kind of, what data to pull for, is it about the cost of the supplemental contracts? Is it about the cost of legal fees associated with, I mean, like, what's the,
Transportation.
transportation.
Yes, that's huge.
And is it, my question then, is it something that isn't controllable? Right, because we know we have certain kids here, we have to send them, but they can be served, so how much of this can be controlled and measured? How can we be specific to those pieces?
But if there's grant funding, I don't know how we,
It is, if I may, I think
yeah.
what you're thinking about is our students that are served, that we're not able to serve within district, we're serving outside agencies or being served out of our district. So a indicator in these, how are we doing that? Preparing or getting ourselves to where we can serve. So that would be preparing our staff and programming. So we need to do some things in our program to be able to serve. And the indicator contracts would be how is the need for outside agency contracts decreasing, us increasing our
Yes.
ability to be able to serve our kids? I think it's a combination of those two.
Yeah,
If I
and,
li-
yeah,
hear
how
you.
do we make that shift, you know, because absent any indicators, we're not really monitoring that. I mean, maybe you are internally, but how do we monitor that, absent having a indicator?
And you're also talking about, my thought was, how many contracts we have for employees that are here.
Right, right. So it's a retention issue as well.
That could be definitely a staffing piece, so how.
So
we do
it does fall under
reducing-
organizational.
Reducing our reliance on agency staff.
Yes.
Part of that is, what we also doing in partnerships with colleges to make sure that we're getting enough special education staff in those areas we need. It's a combination as well.
Dr. Homer. Okay, thank you. Okay. So we had 6 or 5? You're good with 5, Denise? Okay, and everybody? Okay. Number 6 is talking about evaluation in PD. Premier workforce.
On the number of PD offerings, can we also get what types of offerings they are? So it's not just the number, we offered 100 PD offerings, but it's kind of like to see how they break down. And then, I don't know if we have what it was last year.
So we've separated, right, learning
Yeah, so
versus.
a lot of it is tracked by ERO, which is our online professional development program. But you're absolutely right, there's PD happening everywhere. And so Kathy and I actually had a conversation today about how do we provide a comprehensive view of all the PD that's happening. I think that's important as we think about coherence anyways, the district, and ensuring we're all going in the same direction. And so we will be able to have that, particularly this year. Now, being able to look back for baseline data may be a bit more challenging, but certainly see what we can do.
Or is it a variance of them?
With baseline data, we study that for increase. So an increase in staff participating, an increase in staff completing, as well as we gotta have some kind of idea of what we want. Percent of eligible staff participating, 50, 75, I have no idea, but what is that? And if we see a level that's 40, do we think that it should be higher?
So there's different types of, right, so.
But I think overall, I think it's overall, is it something, how much is in there? Or, I mean, how much are people actually getting, or in this case, participating in? And
Well, can we add the survey results to that? I'm sure you do that, right? Survey results for PD as the KPIs.
Rather than just the number, but what did people feel that it was valuable?
Yeah, that it was valuable. I mean, I think that's more important than whether they got something out of it. Because I know historically, I don't know, a long time ago, we offered a lot of PD, a lot of trainings, I remember.
We continue to offer a lot of trainings. We're going to show you the poster.
Okay. What I wanted to say.
They're not necessarily representative of actually what's happening. So
Well, what I want to say was that we had a lot of trainings that were deemed not effective, so.
I think
So
the
that
surveys
would
are hard
be.
though, because we can get 3 reminders, but if we don't complete it and you only have 10% of people who actually attended complete it, it's hard as facilitators to actually take that feedback. And frustrating as facilitators too, but because you want the feedback when you're facilitating that learning. But so I think a lot of them do, not all of them consistently, but I think even the ones that do, if we're not requiring it as an exit slip or something like that, or in time, I mean, you know how hard it is to PD itself.
You ever did it, I know that we have before, is the type of PD that's aligned with the role. So example, a lot of work with our leadership development around PLL endorsement, those types of align with their role. And so we have that, keep that kind of data.
Exactly, so there's a lot of
addition to
differences, right?
I wonder about the stuff that's not in here though, because I know like as a team, we do book studies and we do things that is not on here, that's happening all the time. We do design thinking sessions and some executive cabinet and the superintendent's community, so we're doing things that are not captured in that system, that are not ever gonna show up on any data sets. And so that's a missed opportunity. So I think sometimes it's captured in your weekly updates, but it's not necessarily captured here in this
everywhere.
Those same types of.
The
Right.
PLCs and.
Right,
yeah,
there's all-
absolutely.
right.
So there's a lot of different.
So do we want to, how do we want
Which
to
I
change?
think is not a Kent problem, it's an everywhere problem, right? Yeah.
So going back to Debbie's question, do we want to keep it at percent? I mean, that doesn't make.
Perhaps maybe what if we change it to percent of staff participating in PE opportunities that we can track? Because I don't know, I mean, you could have 100 PE opportunities, but you can also have 50 that are very quality programs.
Mm.
So, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know if the number would be the best representation
Yeah.
of the quality of them.
Yeah, that's why I said
There's
some
lots
sort of
things that
results.
come out. So we're putting quality of or percent of those. I'm not sure, what is it we want to measure? What do we want to measure? What do we want to measure?
I want to see the effectiveness of, you know, because it costs money.
Yeah, that's what.
I know,
Because
I
then-
know, but effectiveness meaning from the survey point of view, not, you know, how are we using that PD
Yeah, so
data?
that's number one, but I'm thinking, or that was all under, but that's objective to the people that are.
Right,
expecting.
right,
So-
exactly.
So I'm saying that's not, I guess my question for number 3 specifically is how are we going to measure
So,
the effectiveness of, not just the number?
so number 3 is very explicit about, it's about university partnerships.
No, I'm sorry.
And-
You're on the case, I'm under number
Yeah, it
three.
goes-
Yeah, it goes to the second page.
It goes to the second page. It is very
We
specific.
did the same thing.
And it speaks to some of the investments. So we have programs right now, we have partnerships that we've cultivated with university partners where we are helping eligible staff advance their careers and fill positions within the district. So for example, paras becoming teachers. And so if we're making that investment, if both from the university partner perspective and the district perspective, what percentage of eligible staff are actually participating in that, taking advantage of that opportunity, completing that, and then from a district perspective, are we actually staffing those people who have completed that? And so that's kind of that, are we aware of who's eligible and are they taking advantage of that? Are we making sure that they're aware of that opportunity? Are they completing that opportunity? Because a lot of them are happening here at district, so they don't have to travel, they don't have to, and right now there's some grant dollars associated with that as well. Yeah, so that's why the 3, and then we can add other things to it, but that part of 3 wasn't vague, it was very specific
Yeah.
to things that the district is actually taking action in.
My fault, because I didn't realize.
I know.
that.
It's okay, when you said, I was like, wait, it's not, I was like,
Yeah,
no, I was like, how
like,
much more
yeah,
specific do they
sorry.
want? I was like, we can, but,
They worked really hard on that, this steering committee.
I was like, yeah, they,
But I like
sorry.
Yeah.
Question, it could be a word question, so I'm looking at the leadership development pipeline, I see principals, essential admin, and then I look down to PDs for classified. Specifically, they talk about development aligned with current role of organization. Is there no program for teacher, leadership for teachers and classified staff as well? Is it just leadership development pipeline for principals and essential admin?
The intention is that there's a leadership development pipeline that starts from wherever we would like to. I mean, I think the way it's written here is percent of principals promoted, but I think
And
that we
so
talk
add
about
leadership staff.
percent of employees, percent of administrators promoted from other schools positions, then it could be EAs, it could be APs, it could
It's
be,
very specific to those two, right?
maybe we change it to administrators, make it more inclusive.
Say more people than that.
Percent of administrators promoted from other school-based positions. You could even say, if you're thinking about maybe your teacher leadership opportunities too, I don't know how granular you want to get it. I mean, EA is not an administrator, but it is a teacher leadership opportunity.
as long as it's coded and we can pull it, we can get it. So, and I took the word leadership out of the second one, and so it's percent of central admin staff. So it's not just leadership, it's just central admin staff, so it kind of opens that up as well. Okay.
Shall we go to 7? Okay. Superintendent will work effectively with Board of Directors, clear expectations, two-way communication, and by providing relevant information in a timely manner. Yeah, I still have some concerns about this being two-way. The communication protocol compliance particularly. Providing weekly updates to directors, as Director of District Operations. But we also talked about, this is really a board item also.
When I'm thinking like
Communication with the
communication
board.
protocol compliance, I'm not actually gonna look for whether I got a weekly update. Like the count of weekly updates is not necessarily interesting to me as an indicator. It's more of like, how many things were presented to us prior to a decision, or how many individual one-on-ones or whatever that is that are held in a timely manner. You know, because a lot of this is related to basically what we didn't want to see that happened in the past year when I think about this. And so I think about meets with us prior to this happening, informs us prior to this decision, something like that, even if we don't have to prove anything.
Yeah, it just still feels one way right now, and I don't know how that can change. I mean, there's that OPMA issue, which is always the big issue. But I think responses to email was something that we talked about. You know, if the board has questions, you know, we want to see, because we can't respond to the public until we have a response back from the district. So that's a big one, I think, that we need to start tracking. And then with the calendar compliance, I know that was something big.
So when let's say I presented a school board, presented a scheduled board meeting, work sessions, special presentations, held according to the calendar, suggesting that, you know, let's say that we had a schedule for a budget review on one week. If it didn't happen that week, it happened a week later. That would technically be a failure of compliance under the current definition. I just want to, if we're interested in being that technical. Or
we would have failed this week then.
right, something like that. Do we, you know, because when we go back and review this and we say, oh, we're 25% compliant, am I more interested about did it happen versus did it happen on a specific day?
I don't think you want to get so rigid that you can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the number doesn't, I don't know if the number means anything to me
Yeah.
to know that it happened on
So
a
it's almost
specific
like the
day.
cancellation or timely, you know, percentage of timely board meeting presentations or something like that. Not scheduled necessarily.
Is work effectively with the school district board of directors by establishing clear expectations for two-way meeting communication. Because these don't speak to, these speak to us. So is it to the board then? Should we just say to the board as this is speaking to that?
Well, I think it's both.
But that's not what speaks of.
But I think it is, because these meetings are open meetings, and we're not necessarily asking anybody. So one of the points that I wanted to see was that the communication happens both to the board at the work session and in public for anyone to show up and listen to. So when I think about the calendar is both about what we get presented and what is presented in an available public session.
The weekly updates are to
That word.
us or district operations. This is district, so directors of district operations.
I think
I think it's
it's
written the other
not
way.
written
I
right.
think it's about district
Yeah,
operations.
district,
necessarily,
about, yeah.
directors of the district
That's
operations
confusing.
themselves.
And then
I looked at it
scheduled
too.
meetings attended.
Yeah.
Kind of a calendar too. So our calendar,
Well, but no, this is scheduled, oh, I see meetings for just our DPS, configurations and calendar, I see what you're saying. So then this is specific to us.
it's specific to us, and I think it had, like, when I think about it, what our board calendar is not just what we want to hear, what we want presented to anyone. And therefore, compliance with that calendar is both what we want and
But
what we
anyone
want
doesn't have
presented.
input as to what's presented, we have input, so that's not really, because if we wanted it to anyone, we would have to go out to the community and say, what would you like to see presented on our calendar? It's us who came up with the calendar, right, us who came up with what we want to be presented, so it is us.
But maybe the green on the calendar is separate from this goal, because that's our goal, is the calendar, versus his goal is compliance with the calendar.
But the meetings fall under the calendar.
Yeah. Again, so the goal that has to be specific to the superintendent. We also have a goal around what we want in the calendar. That's
Right, but
our.
providing relevant information. So I'm just, the timing map, the relevant information, that piece is, because I feel like it just ends when there's not.
You're saying, is that timely matter to the community or is it to the
That's what
board?
I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, is it to us?
Yeah, we can
Is it
just
to the
put
board?
in a timely manner to the board.
Well, I think it's our.
But these KPIs, so that's what I'm saying, I'm not
Yeah.
putting it together, but, okay.
No, it
I
is
see what you're saying.
specifically to the board, and so, I mean,
And
these
and
two
I'm
items
just
are.
trying to figure out, because I can be really.
Well,
confused.
now, if I understand what you're saying, so if we were to be specific and say to the board, then, my question wouldn't apply if it's to the community, because that
Right.
doesn't make any
And these
sense, the
KPIs
two-way communication.
speak to us.
Right.
Except
So,
for our one
so,
piece.
so in that sense, Russ, I think
So
it's,
that's what I'm
yeah,
saying.
you,
Yeah, we gotta clarify what
To
we
the
decide.
board.
yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah.
think.
So are
Okay.
you saying then, Mike,
So-
if you added yours about email responses onto here, that would speak to the other part of community?
Right, it would-
These would still speak to the board and then?
Well, no, I'm not saying, I'm saying this, if we put, my question is specifically to speaking to the relationship between the board and superintendent. And so that would clearly not apply to the community. So that means that this goal 1 is really addressing the board and not the community, I guess is what I'm saying.
So goal 7.
Yeah,
Okay.
goal 7 would be, so if we want to be clear, we
Right,
can
but
say.
Be clear
yeah,
the
Here is
goal.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying, we gotta be clear. on
So
it.
be clear on the goal that it's addressing communication between the superintendent and the board.
Add
Does that make sense?
to the board
Yes,
after timely manner.
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
All right.
And then add communication.
And I got the response to board
Responses,
email.
Yes.
Um,
Board email,
and information shared prior to decisions, one-on-ones with board members, kind of before decisions are made, shared timely. I made a note about. Those are the kind of big idea pieces around. Okay.
okay, board questions rather than email. So, I mean,
Got
it
it.
could come
I got it.
some other format. Inquiries, yeah.
The calendar's done?
Well, I mean, the part for the board, it's done as far as we know, but we haven't really, the
Board
regular board meeting.
presentations and
No, the regular board
work
meetings are
sessions
not
and
done.
special sessions.
Yeah, all our work sessions should be on it, but our regular content, yeah.
Because that's what's on here.
Correct.
Okay. Kind of a moving target.
No, now, regular meetings are all on the calendar, but yes, the presentations, the specific presentations
Uh-huh.
are not on there. So.
But it's
where
called
the-
out here.
It's called out specific
Well,
As a
have we put
target.
on?
Yeah,
we
so
put
he
on there
knows that there's a
communication.
meeting,
But this says
Updated
meeting
strategic plan.
presentations as a percent of scheduled meeting presentations.
So the-
And so I'm just saying,
Go
how
ahead.
is that gonna be?
Well, no, I think the board calendar should, at least what I remember, has on it, when we want to have a communication update, when we want to have a strategic planning update,
Yeah.
budget reviews.
Right.
That's what I would
Um.
reference when I'm talking about meeting presentations, that not only do we have the meeting, but the subject
Okay.
was
Yeah.
presented.
And the regular board meetings are already on the calendar, it's just we haven't listed out the presentation. So, I mean, he's going to be at a regular board meeting, he's not gonna walk out.
Yeah, I
during
think I was just being,
presentations.
I just wanted to be clear, like, because not all of the content of those agendas is
Yeah,
set for the rest
no,
of the year,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that was.
And so we do need the board to get that information, what we want to see in the presentations to Karen. I think last time we talked about that we would all send to Karen the presentations we want to see, and then,
And that's separate from this metric, because it's at the meeting.
So
it wouldn't be, because
Okay.
we're talking about the content, and that's a separate step, yes,
Okay.
that we need to do, but it doesn't affect, whether Dr. Watts attends these
Okay.
meetings.
So what I also heard, I think Director Hardy say, was that it wasn't so much about the percent of them happening according to schedule, as much as the topics that were covered in a timely manner and were not missed,
Okay,
skipped, or
gotcha.
left out.
Yeah.
So, for example, the budget hearing didn't happen this week, it's gonna happen
Oh,
next week. It's
right.
not that we're not gonna have a second budget hearing, and then, it's those kinds of,
Okay.
is my interpretation of what you said.
Okay.
Because I think that won't mean anything if we miss, if we move something from week to week, but we still have content. The point is to have
Okay.
content on a regular basis.
So that's a good
And
distinction.
informed ahead of time, and
Mhm.
the other
Right.
pieces go with it.
Yes.
It's a good distinction, because we don't have budget hearings in our calendar yet. We've talked about having it regularly, but not hearings, I don't want to use that word again.
Budget updates. are
Budget
there.
updates.
They're
yeah.
there, they're there.
No, it's not in our calendar. We have not put in budget updates for the entire year. It's not on our calendar. Trust me, I know that. I worked on the calendar.
For some reason, okay, maybe I made it up. then,
No.
I'm sorry.
It's not on our
This is
calendar,
where-
but we need to get it
this
on
is
the
where
calendar.
We're talking about the
That's a good
expectation.
point.
I think we're operating under the expectation that we provided monthly budget updates, as happened in the past. It's also another metric on another goal.
Now, let's make a distinction here. We're talking about, there's a budget update every month. That might be in place, I don't know. But there's also budget updates at our work sessions we've talked about. Any changes, and that's what
I
I'm
think
talking
we're
about.
talking, so one of this.
Like today's,
Would be
fiscal
like an
updates,
annual
that's what-
planning cycle as
Yeah.
opposed to a monthly variance.
Yeah. So our regular board meetings, we're expecting that every month, so.
I was like, and they're happening.
Yeah.
I was like, great.
Yeah. So that's separate from, say, budget discussions that we have.
Like tonight.
Yeah,
We
like
had to add it.
tonight.
Or like the thing, like
We
when
don't
you
have any of
start
that.
with, when we start looking at it next, I don't know, April, when we start looking at enrollment, we start looking
Yeah.
at instructors.
Yeah,
doing all these
exactly.
things,
Those kinds of
those aren't
mid-
necessarily in our BSGT calendar right
No,
now.
they're not.
even
They
though
should be.
They will be
Yeah.
April through June plus the August.
So we do need to think about that, because we did talk about having more regular meetings, discussing budgets than just a presentation, but having a conversation around it.
Well, part of that went along with the task force, right? So then we had the task
Yeah.
force making sure that they were presenting and
Yeah.
having conversations in work sessions. So.
All right, so we're done with 7 and
Well,
11?
so with this, we have updates. We expect to see those updates at some point in the year, and then we officially approve these goals. And
We're
then-
hoping for the 24th, but are we going to
then
make it?
when do we set our first review period?
To see an updated version of this, that's possible.
And we can approve on the 24th?
That is up to you.
Yes. Okay, but when will this be able to get updated?
So if the agenda item is for the 24th, then that's what we'll work toward.
Okay.
Ms. Pam can help with that. We can work toward that.
Okay, all right. Excellent. Good, moving to our final topic. We're at the 7:30 mark, so we mentioned that approximately 2 hours, so we're hoping now another, I don't know, how long will this be? What do we think?
I'd say it's an intro.
Another half an hour? Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So, all right. We're moving on to the discussion for performance management audit scope and parameters. So I'll just read through the components. I don't know if everybody needs to stay. You're welcome
You'd
to
like to
stay.
be excused, you can
You're
be
welcome to
excused if you
stay,
want to be
yeah.
excused.
Mr. Mike, can I just?
If anyone needs to.
Yeah, we're both
Yeah. And Curtis. Okay, so it would call Curtis, I'm not sure.
So this is just part one, right? So this is the performance management audit scope, and we still have the, more of the forensic audit scope. Right?
This would, the idea is it would cover, well, it depends on what we want in forensic stuff in minutes, but ideally it would cover what we want to know. Now, when I think, now, this is what we're trying to definition, when I think forensic audit, I think, are you auditing that what you reported in the past is accurate or not? Like a
Hi, Curtis.
supplemental
Are you
statement.
available to? Hi.
This is not for that.
Right.
This would
Okay.
cover 1 and 2, but ideally, it started with the second one.
Okay, okay, thank you. Why don't you guys continue?
So I created most of this. Talking about a performance management audit, the idea was to go back and look at how things were done. Actual events. Take a sample of whatever it is, the scope selections, and look through a process flow. Starting as early as how was a vendor identified. You identify the need for something. I need regular, or I need milk, whatever it is. And how is the vendor identified? How were they selected? Did it go through the bid process? Did it go through the approval process and the invoicing and everything like that? Out of that came component one, which is we also wanted to clarify if at any point in time over this time period we had conflicting policies and procedures. Meaning, the policy that said one thing, but a procedure said a different thing, either in terms of who approved it, at what level, whatever it is. And therefore, policies themselves were not aligned, and therefore the approval will follow that misalignment or not. Scope is the time, policy and procedures, the subject, that's the comparison there. The other thing we talked about was necessarily providing, not directing the scope, but providing direction in terms of areas we definitely want to have a sample of. So things like technology license purchases, software purchases, curriculum purchases, professional service contracts, whatever that is, like the scope is, okay, do this for professional service contracts. Then there, over the years, this is how it went through. Or if it's all projects at a certain dollar amount, whatever that is, kind of define what we're really wanting to look for. Thus kind of got to the expected outcome, which is we understand that everything went through the process at the time, and we understand that the approvals and evidence were there to say, yep, we did this, we have the evidence, we have the approval, and we have whatever it is. Both getting that transparency. Even if policies and procedures were misaligned, at least knowing when they were misaligned and what was necessarily approved under that time period. This is a guess, by the way, but this is also coming from past experiences. Like you could have an alignment in misalignment in procedures, but at least whatever went through there followed that misalignment.
And so, not when you say you're assuming that everything went through?
No.
said,
You wanna assume
we
that.
understand everything went through that process, and I'm saying that, I don't know. that
So
that's-
the audit would gather evidence of whether it did or not.
Got it. Okay,
But
that's-
that evidence would show us it did or it didn't. And we would know that it either was done the way it was supposed to be done, or the way policy, or it wasn't. But at least we know that outcome and potentially that could happen. As well as the defining personal contract operating rules. So a lot of this would actually help us inform. We've made an update to our policy now and procedures, understand how that will impact in the future. Are they at the right level? What do we expect going forward, either to change or not change? One of the things that I specifically wanted out of this was kind of that first two expected outcomes. We know the transparency of the tax decisions. You know, how was this approved? Even if we don't agree with that's how it should be approved now, we at least know how it was done in the past. And we can say, yes, it was done this way, either for this specific decision or for this group of purchases.
Yeah, initially when Ross and I spoke, I didn't think it really captured the budget information. So if we look at our response to the complaint, you know, we're talking specifically about performance management audit, but we're also talking about looking at internal control systems and focusing on vendor spending, contracts. But also we talk about budgeting there. And so when we really look at number 2, approved procedures and evidence of approvals, I think that captures that financial information that we want to make sure that that process was followed appropriately. And the number 2 would capture, you know, even the budgetary information. So so I didn't feel like we needed to get into specific details on what we would look at. But if there are specific contracts, you know, that we want them to look at, that we've seen go through that are over a certain amount, say 25,000, you know, those could be examples that we can ask them to take a look at. Have any concerns about the approach or?
And then does so obviously you put it out for RFP and then they come back. So does then the selected auditors that then looks at the overall, you had 50,000 contracts on this year, so our sample size is going to be X. And then they would randomly pick those samples. So we wouldn't be saying, look at this and look at that.
Well, we could do that too. I
But
think
it would be a sample though, so.
Well, I mean, there would be specifics that we can pull out, or they can pull out from the report that I requested, for example. You know, contracts over
Right.
$25,000.
Right.
You know, give a wide range so
Mhm.
they can look at some of those. So we wouldn't be giving specifics in that case.
Right.
We could give directions on how. And also we can, if there were things that came out from prior to 2012, 2013, we can give directions to go back a specific year and look at something that has come out. I think we still reserve the right to be able to get to the specifics, right? So Curtis couldn't join us, just spoke with him. He's not able to join us, but I think we should pass it through him. Go ahead, Denise.
I had a question for these people who might be previous employees as well.
Where? Sorry. Oh, keepers.
Because I know some of these questions and, you know, the people who are during, so does that include prior?
I think it can. We can decide whether it can or not. We also take the risk of just don't get the information because the obligation will be higher. But I think it can. I mean, it can talk. It can. You know, it depends on what we want. You know, one of the ideas of the interview with key personnel was to define the operating roles and responsibilities between the groups. So, what is this person's or this personnel group's understanding of the purchasing process compared to procedure and was compared to other groups, let's say. So I think especially in the more recent years, it's more relevant to the people who are there now. But to the extent that we want to know something from someone that used to be here, should we try to include that?
But at a certain point, too, you lose some, right? I mean, I'm not sure I can speak to when we did 5 years ago.
But that might seem relevant. I'm wondering, is there, what are the circumstances around, say, potentially we have previous board members that go back to 2013, 14? Are they compelled to provide documentation or, I mean, because I know that everything's public record, right? So are they compelled to participate based on some of the choices that might have been made or some of the questions that might be asked during their time of service?
I would think we would decide who, or we could give recommendations, right? Who
Right,
we
but I'm
should
saying,
be-
so would they be
Are they
compelled
compelled?
to? Right.
Yeah, I don't think.
So just the records would be public?
Yes.
Okay, so just the records would be public.
So do we want to change that to present and former staff
I don't
person?
know if we necessarily, because I'm not sure how you,
Because they're not personnel anymore.
What's a possible approach?
Right, this is a possible approach based on what we might want to see from whoever.
but I would think also as you do the bid process, right, when
Yeah.
you're talking to people, you could ask them for what they recommend. They may say, yep, it's a good idea to pull back people, we'd like to be able to do that, or, so.
The idea was to say, you know, we're not just limiting the scope to some kind of data query set in the system of financial record. We're actually going to talk to the people involved in making the decision and putting it through.
From a communication and a words perspective, when the forensic piece is not carried through to this part, I think that should be considered, because I think, I don't have a background in finance, but it means something different to do a financial audit than a forensic audit, because usually in a forensic audit, you kind of know what you're looking for, or you're going after something, like the objective is there. And usually, and my understanding is that's the kind of the difference, and so when you go out with that scope of work, that would be kind of outlaid in here, and I think that's kind of here. But if we've used the word forensic in here, and we've used it in interviews, if that's what's going to happen, then if it's not captured here, then I would think in the scope of work, just, you know, maybe it could be explored through the RFP process, and I understand this is a draft, but I think that word importance, that has a meaning. So if it's not what we meant, then I think we can clarify that, but if it is indeed what we meant, then I would think you would want to be consistent and call that out in.
Yeah, we can change that verbiage.
Especially coming from the other side, it's kind of, it is what, two different things. So when I think about a performance measure, I think of, does the policy and procedures work as such that the evidence follows that general thing, samples, things like that, versus a forensic is I want to know if all contracts or all purchases over 75,000 were approved according to that schedule at the time. And we can do both.
So we are saying that we would do both, so. yeah.
And necessarily either, and this is where we should necessarily tie them together, but we need the option so that we can separate them out as two different audits, or obviously we can do both and provide that separation between the two.
So you're saying we would do this one first, and then depending on what's found, then you go back and do the other one? Because this one says pulling a sample of contracts, and you're saying the other one would be looking at all of those.
And I think that's us. It's like, what's more important to us? Is it to get these results and then define what we want to do a forensic audit on, or do we comfortable finding that scope? Or at the same time, do it before at some point.
Probably be more cost effective to try to do it all.
But is it the same group that would do both?
Depending on the agents, yeah, it could.
Budget.
Well, we talked about 3 smaller organizations, not a larger organization that can cover both audit agencies. Three to 4, I think.
But wouldn't we put it
No,
out to
for a
everybody?
bid, for,
Or are we just putting it out to select people for a bid?
Well, to be clear, should we follow our existing?
I don't know.
Policy requires a competitive bid. I think,
Yeah.
based on that amount, it's 40,000. I think it would reach tier 3, whatever that
well,
is.
yeah, I mean, we would
Which is a
cut,
form
we
of
would narrow
competitive
it down
exercise.
to, and do more interviews at that point. Because we couldn't do interviews with everybody out there.
Well, no, but, yeah, you would narrow it down, but I'm
Yeah.
saying, but we would put, we're
Yeah,
not
we'd put it out
only
for a
putting
bid.
it out to 3 groups to say, hey, we want these 3 groups to bid on it.
Yeah.
We're putting it out per our policy that.
The policy, which I think is a minimum of 3, I'm just making up, whatever it is, plus.
That we have.
And if it's not,
Nobody else.
then there's rules about if you don't get 3. And
Right,
Yeah.
right. I just want to make sure we're following that policy.
Could be the first example.
Do we know the policy? That's the question.
So this is the next step, then you're running this by legal counsel just to make sure that they don't have any.
Yeah. Curtis has a copy, but he couldn't get on the phone, so I don't know what he thinks of it. So that's where we're at. Any other comments? If you have thoughts, comments, in staff, let us know. I guess preferably by next Wednesday as well, or Monday, maybe Monday. All right.
They're going back to the policy.
That's it.
They're going back to the policy.
Oh,
I'm like, it's timely.
okay. So if there are no more questions, we're adjourned. Thank you all.